buffalo? Every part. If anybody has seen a buffalo in real life, you know that this is a big, giant, hulking animal. It's huge. But the Blackfoot people would use every single part of it. So as we go through this, I want you to be thinking about, like, really every part? Yes, every part. And it was used in different ways. Some parts were eaten, some were used as clothing, right? Some parts were used for homes. If you can remember what the homes are called, I'm going to ask you again. And some parts were used for ceremony. So every single part got used, but used in different ways. But the main part is that the buffalo was very, very special. So special to the Blackfoot people, in fact, that because I said, like I mentioned, those are my ancestors. Those are, that's the people that I come from. Think about this. If the buffalo didn't survive, if the buffalo weren't there to help the Blackfoot people survive, likely I would not be here. And I have two sons. Tarek knows one of them very well. Actually, he knows both of them very closely. My sons wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. My family wouldn't be here. So if the buffalo did not exist, the Blackfoot people would probably not have survived, and likely I wouldn't be here today. So that's how important the buffalo is. And I have a short story that I'd like to read to you, to just kind of have you have the idea. This is a creation story, which means sometimes from creation stories, there's some parts of it that might be true and some parts of it that might not be true, but there's still some really good information that we can get from creation stories. So this is a creation story, and I'm reading from this book. If anybody has ever seen this book, it's called The Girl Who Helped Thunder. And there's all kinds of different little short stories in there. So this one is a really good one because this story is called How the Buffalo Came to Be. Okay, so just sit back and listen very carefully. It's a short story. Long, long ago, the Lakota people, now the Lakota people are very closely related to the Blackfoot people because the Lakota people also relied on the buffalo for survival, okay? So long, long ago, the Lakota people lived beneath the earth. But then the one who was their leader, Tokaheh was his name, heard that there was a place above them, a world on the surface where there was much light. Life will be easier there, Tokaheh said. Let us leave this dark underworld. But Tokaheh was wrong. And there was a holy man among the people who knew this, and his name was Tatanka. Tatanka is the word for buffalo in Lakota language. We should not do this, he warned them. Life will be very hard if we leave here. But Tokaheh ignored Tatanka's wise words and led his people up from the underworld. It was a long and difficult journey. At last, they came out at the place that is called Wind Cave. And when they turned around and they saw that the way that they had come had closed up behind them, for better or for worse, they would now have to make this new world their home. The people soon found that although the above world was beautiful with the light of the sun in the day and the brightness of the moon and stars at night, it was not an easy place to live. They felt the heat and dryness of the summer. They experienced the rain and the snow and the hail and lightning and thunder and strong winds and great storms that left them wet and cold. Food, too, was difficult to find. As Tatanka had warned, life on the surface was very hard. It was so hard, in fact, that it seemed as if the people would not survive. Tatanka, the holy man, who had warned them about this, saw how the people were suffering and took pity on them. He decided to sacrifice himself for his people. He changed his form and came to their aid in the shape of a great shaggy beast that they could hunt. He came as the buffalo. Use every part of me, Tatanka told the people. I will be the life of your nation. Then where there had been just one animal, now there were many, flowing in great herds across the plains. Soon the people found how true Tatanka's words had been. The meat of the buffalo fed them and helped them grow strong. From the great animal's hide, they made coverings for their lodges and were able to keep warm even when the coldest winds of winter blew and the snow piled deep. They made spoons and ladles from the buffalo's horn, shovels from the shoulder blades, cooking pots from the stomach, and knife handles and sled runners from the rib bones. Even the dried dung of the buffalo was useful as fuel for their fires, burning clean and hot. Marley's calling me again. Okay, I'll call Marley. And so it was that Tatanka's gift saved his people, and the Lakota became known as the Buffalo Nation. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good little idea about how integral the buffalo was to those First Nations people like the Lakota, like the Blackfoot people, that they relied on the buffalo to provide them with all of their needs, essentially. And we know what our needs are, right? Our needs versus our wants are very different. Our needs are food, shelter, clothing, are the basics. Well, the buffalo provided that. Okay, so let's take a look at some artifacts. We're gonna start with this. We're gonna start with this one, even though it looks kind of plain. This one is made from the hide, okay? But this is actually rawhide, and it's really interesting because it's a very different from this stuff. This is nice and soft. This is like leather. We see clothing get made out of this kind of thing, which then makes you realize, oh yeah, okay, leather. That's how they would make their clothing and their shoes. Anybody know what the Blackfoot call their shoes? Called. Here's an example. Moccasins. If anybody has moccasins, you might be rocking your mocks in November. You're wearing your moccasins to school. So these moccasins are my son's moccasins. And these were made by a very, very, very special lady who is my grandmother's best friend. They went to residential school together when they were younger. And she is this little old lady, this little old Blackfoot lady. And she's this grandma who's kind of losing her hearing, but she can still, look at, if you can see, all of those are beads. That's beautiful, beautiful beadwork that she did. So even though she can't hear very well, she can still use a little tiny needle and thread and pick up one by one by one every single one of these beads and make these beautiful patterns. Now the other thing, here's a trick to learning about how to create this kind of leather to make clothing, to make moccasins. How to turn the hide, to turn buffalo hide into this nice soft leather. And then how do you turn buffalo hide into this hard leather? You hear it? How do we do that? Well, it's a different process. You take the buffalo hide for this and you use a lot of smoke, and eventually you do a lot of working it, work the hide until it turns into this nice soft leather, which then you can imagine when I smell this leather, doesn't matter if it's this one or this one. It's my favorite, one of my favorite smells in the whole world. It smells like campfire. It smells like smoke. And it reminds me of sitting around a campfire, you know, when you're nice and cozy sitting around a fire. Hopefully we get to do some of that this summer. Some of you have probably already been doing it in your backyards, having some fires out with your family. Awesome. But how do we get this? How do we get this leather? Well, this isn't leather, this is rawhide. This one is cured. This is taking another piece of the buffalo. Can anybody, if you know where on your body this comes from, on the buffalo, this uses the buffalo's brains. The buffalo brains are smeared over the hide and then laid out in the sun. And if you wanted it to be a special shape, you would turn it into a special shape so that it dried in that shape. So stuff like what? What would you want to transform and let it keep its shape? Something like this? Something like this that you could put on. And then you could pull your arrows out of. This is called a quiver or an arrow bag. So you see how this is that hard rawhide, and it's been stretched out, and the red, if you see the red is just paint. And I'll get to that a little bit later about how you get that red paint on there. See how it's that same rawhide there? Takes that shape. Brilliant. Using the buffalo's brains to cure it.
All right. Mrs. Big Bull, some of the kids thought, Dallas thought it was the leg bones that they would have taken to make the rawhide. And Corrigan thought it was the back. So I don't know if they thought that that was the part of the buffalo that they took it from, but they're quite impressed to know that it came from the brain.
The brain. Super interesting, right? That's the stuff you smear out. What other things would they want to create with the rawhide, do you think? So they have the bag. What else? Hopefully that's not too loud if some of you are wearing headphones. Same thing. The drums is the rawhide spread out over the rim, over a wooden rim, and that when it's pulled nice and taut, then you can get that drum.
Malcolm even said that with the rawhide, they would make some clothes. Is that correct?
With the rawhide, what would you want? What do you think? Which one of these would you want your clothes to be made out of?
In the chat, I want you to tell me if you want the clothes made out of rawhide or if you want your clothes made out of leather. And then I'll give you an update, Mrs. Big Bull.
Okay, sounds good. Yes, so, and this is the, so when I say this is the buffalo hide, it's the skin, right? So if you can see here, I have a whole big buffalo robe all here. Let's see. So this is the side, this is the leather side, and then this side has the fur, this side has the hair on it. So, so other things, that's okay. So again, going back to these moccasins, summer moccasins, perfect to wear in the summertime. Maybe not so good in the wintertime. You're gonna get a lot of snow in there.
Oh, I think you muted yourself.
All right, there we go.
Mrs. Big Bull, the outstanding response was leather, but one child, Kaden Cole, can you turn your mic on? And can you explain why you said it depends?
It depends because if you want to be like soft and warm and you want it to be comfortable, you use the leather. But if you want like protection from different types of stuff, you could use the rawhide because it's hard and can take big hits and stuff.
Ah, you're right, Kaden. So when the rawhide could very well be used as a shield as well. So you're right about that. Good job. So, and I'll get to, I was talking about when I was holding up the moccasins, summer moccasins. These would be worn in the summertime. These are nice and light. You could run for days. In the wintertime, though, you have, just like how you have on your snow boots, you have that insulation that goes inside your snow boot, and that insulation keeps your foot nice and warm in the snow and in the ice. Same idea with moccasins. They would take something like this. See how this still has the buffalo hair on it. This is the buffalo fur. So they would take something like this and create their moccasins. Now see, this is the skin. This is the hide on this side. They would take it and make their moccasins with this, the fur, on the inside of your foot. So then your foot would stay nice and warm inside with that fur. And then on the outside is that rawhide that's going to keep out the wet and the snow and the ice. So from that, we can kind of understand that the Blackfoot people actually use the buffalo as a way of technology, right? That's really a form of technology, of creating a winter moccasin that's going to keep your foot warm by using the buffalo. Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay.
Just before you move on to the next one, Parker was asking, is the buffalo hair fur, is it soft or rough?
Good question. Very soft. Very soft. I wish you could feel it. Normally, if we were in class right now, I'd be passing these around so that you could feel it. Very soft inside too. You could easily sleep on this. Okay. Do we want to take a minute? Do we need to? Or are we good to move on?
I haven't seen any more questions. I think Parker was the one that had the question. I think we're good.
Okay.
All right.
One more reminder, guys, please don't write in the chat unless you have something to add to the conversation, okay? It's causing people who are trying to focus. It gives them a lot of notifications, and so just chill on the chat, as some of you are saying, okay?
Also, remember, grade 4s, if you do have a question and don't want to type it all out, just put a question mark in the chat, and then Miss Samayoa or Miss Nelson will call on you, okay? But enough of the comments, okay? Thank you.
Okay. So every part, right? What did they use the horns for? And I read it in this story. For drinking. And if you can see this one, see how this horn has a bit of, it's carved out here. Perfect. Yes, Malcolm, perfect for a spoon. Good. Yep. Another thing, another way. Have you ever heard of the word, have you ever heard the phrase firekeeper? So there would be one person from the tribe that would be the firekeeper. Now, this is the other more important part about the Blackfoot people, is that they didn't stay in one place, not like how we do. We have our home, we go to that home, it's always there, it's not going anywhere, most of us. The Blackfoot people didn't have permanent homes, right? They had, who wants to type it in, what did they live in? Their homes were, oh, close, Corrigan. They didn't live in permanent homes. They would take their homes down and then they would move to the next place. And they would do that because they had to move with the buffalo. Yes, teepees. Thank you, teepees. And they would take their teepees down and then they would travel to the next place. And then they would set their teepees up again. And the reason why they were doing that is because they had to follow their food. They had to move with the buffalo, right? And so that word for a tribe, a group of people that move and they to follow their food, they're called nomadic. So they were a nomadic tribe that moved around. So there was one person that was a firekeeper, which means that they would take a horn. because this is very good insulation. The horn is very good, and it's almost like a thermos cup. If you think about a thermos that can hold hold the heat in really well, or if it's cold, make sure it stays cold for a long time. Same kind of idea. So you put coals and embers inside the horn, and they stay nice and hot, and you wrap it around so you're holding it. You have your horn almost like a pouch, you cover it up. And so there was one person responsible for taking the coals and the embers and bringing it to the next place. So then they could start the fire again. And then same thing, you move to the next place, you put in the coals and embers inside. So then when you get to the next place, quick fire. Firekeeper's important job. All right. Let's see. So, how about this one? Guys, I have to tell you something about this that's kind of crazy. I brought this buffalo kit home with me, and so I pulled it out last night, and after my boys went to bed, and I asked my husband, hey, do you want to see the buffalo kit? And I pulled this out, and he was like, whoa. So my husband has on his forearm here, he has a tattoo. He has a tattoo of a buffalo skull that when he was a teenager, he pulled a buffalo skull out of the river, and he went and got a tattoo of it. I pulled this one out, exact same skull, like exact same that he has a tattoo on his forearm of. And I'm not kidding you. If you can see that there's a big crack that goes up the front here, and if you can even see that there is a little bit of a mark, a dent right there. He has the same markings on his tattoo. It was wild. Anyway, what was the skull used for?
A hat. I don't know.
This is really heavy too. You imagine that big buffalo? This is that big buffalo head. Okay, there we go. What is the crack for? Oh, that was probably just through age and time and wear and tear that this crack in the skull has happened. Or maybe that's how this buffalo was killed. We don't know. I don't know. Buffalo skull, that one was used for ceremony. So the Blackfoot people were they would have their ceremonies, and if anybody has ever heard of the Sundance is one big ceremony that happens every year in the summer, and where a lot of Blackfoot people come together to practice their ceremony. So the buffalo skull, because remember I said gratitude, they were always giving thanks back to the buffalo. They were always giving thanks for being able to stay alive, because the buffalo would give, they believed that the buffalo would give themselves to the Blackfoot people so that they could survive. So that as a way of gratitude, they would use the skulls in the ceremony to give thanks back. Okay. Also from the buffalo, if we're gonna make clothing, we're gonna need to sew it with something, right? Do you know that this comes from the buffalo as well? This is called sinew. So this is stripped off the off of like the muscle tendons, and you can strip it into small pieces, you can strip it into bigger pieces that could make tools, okay? That you can wrap it around to bind up the tools, or you could do it very small to use it for the string to sew clothes, to sew moccasins. Sinew, super important. I'll show you this as I was holding it up here. Now this is a pretty cool one to see in person, because I can't tell you how heavy this is right here, but you can imagine if I tell you that this is a rock, big heavy rock in there, a rock at the end of this is going to have a lot of leverage. So this would be used as a weapon. This one is a weapon, a club. And so the leverage that you get with this string and with a rock at the end, you can imagine there's going to be quite forceful to hit something. So in battle, could definitely be deadly. But mostly, this one was used for when they would have a lot of buffalo killed. And if anybody's been to the buffalo jump, okay, that whole idea about the buffalo jump is really, really fascinating, because the buffalo, they would have a lot of buffalo go over the cliff at the same time, so that there would be maybe like 100 buffalo that would be killed at the same time, or maybe 200 buffalo killed at the same time, but they all go over the cliff, which means they don't all die on impact. Now remember, the Blackfoot people respected the buffalo so much, they don't want the buffalo to suffer. And so there would be a lot of people that would be waiting at the bottom of the cliff, a lot of people with a tool like this that they could use to go and to kill the buffalo, the ones that didn't die on impact. And again, as they're doing that though, they're doing it in a way that is giving thanks. They believe that the buffalo are giving themselves so that the people can continue to survive. But also imagine, guys, you have to also imagine that the buffalo way back then, to imagine this place way, way back then, there was no houses or roads. There, even before horses came, that's when they were using the buffalo jump to make sure a lot of buffalo went over the cliff so that they would be able to survive through the winter, okay? And so they would be, a lot of people would come together for that to happen. And they would be, before horses, they would have to be using tools like this so that they could kill the buffalo. They could make sure that they, all of the buffalo got processed. Also, using the buffalo jump, another amazing technology. Guys, you think about these buffalo. Think about 100 buffalo that they start out back here. There's a bunch of them, and they slowly but surely drive them until it's a stampede, until all of a sudden they scare them into a stampede, just like on Lion King, when you scare the gazelles, I think they were, into the stampede, and all of a sudden they all rush. Now the buffalo, they had a really, really good sense of smell, but they kind of had poor eyesight. But oh my goodness, they could run. And you have to imagine that there were hundreds of thousands of buffalo that lived in this area, lived here in Lethbridge that we live in now. But before Lethbridge existed, they would roam all around here. There was so much buffalo that some people would say that there's stories about that the prairies, you know how you look out on the prairies, that the prairies would look black sometimes because the buffalo there was so much of them, there's so many of them, that the hills would look black and it would almost look like they were moving because the herds of buffalo were so many. I want to show you this picture.
Can I interrupt you for a second before you move on about more of the buffalo?
Yeah.
Some of the kids asked, I can't remember who it was. One of the kids asked if the sinew comes from the belly.
Oh, good question. Not really from the belly, from the spine. From the spine. From what I understand is that's where those muscles, and so like there's that big tendon that goes down the spine that makes those long, it's easy to just strip off those long pieces of sinew.
And the kids knew right away when you pulled up the weapon that they clearly knew it was a weapon.
Okay.
Weapon. They all knew, and it would definitely hurt. Now, someone asked, was it a weapon against each other for defense, or was it more for the buffalo?
Good question. So could be used in defense, but also the Blackfoot people were incredible archers, but not in the way that we imagine. Like you, if anybody has taken archery, and some of you, I think maybe even in phys ed class, you've done archery. You know, you stand, you have good posture, you stand very straight, you stay very calm, you pull back the arrow, and you breathe out, and then you release. Okay, that's archery that I think that we kind of know in our modern times. Not for the Blackfoot people though. Their archery was a little bit different. It was very super quick, and it was done in a way that it was so precise. Those arrowsmiths, they would practice so much, and it wasn't about it actually, from what I understand about this kind of archery, that you can't actually pause. It's all in emotion. In order to do it, it has to be that quick, like whoop, whoop.
Don't worry about it.
If you can imagine, like a quick motion, it can only happen with that motion. So I'm gonna actually,
Also, pecan.
I can give you another video to go look at. If anybody is super interested in what this would have looked like, what this kind of archery would have looked like, I have a video that you could go and watch, but I'll link that later. So if you're interested in that, maybe just make a note of it for yourself. If anybody's interested in archery.
Grade 4s, can we again, just one last reminder, we're gonna have to turn off the chat. Please stop telling people to stop chatting because that's not helping. There are 4 teachers in here, we can deal with it. So please stop telling people to stop. I'm seeing tons and tons of chats that are more telling people to stop chatting than they are actually chatting. So keep your hands off the keyboard, please. Answering questions that have been asked as the discussion are fine. So if you're answering something that Mrs. Big Bull has said, that's totally fine. If you have a question that you want to type in, that's totally fine. She just said that she'll share out the video, so we'll make sure that you get that. But otherwise, please stop the chatting. We will have to turn it off if it's going to continue, because it's really distracting. Okay, guys? So whether it's to tell people to stop chatting or to just randomly chat, it's got to stop.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to go back to grade 3 here. Remember rocks and minerals? Does anybody know what this kind of rock is? What maybe the name is, or where it comes from, if it's sedimentary, igneous, metamorphic?
Yes.
Oh, flint. Obsidian, Harrison, good job. This is obsidian. So if anybody has seen this, now next question, obsidian, is it sedimentary, igneous, metamorphic? Dun, dun, dun. It's very, very hard. And it's almost like glass. This is like one of those really, really cool stones that looks like it's almost got glass. When you hold it up to the light, it's so cool. It almost looks like it has like a green outside, and then it's just like black on the inside. Igneous rock. Very good. Igneous rock. So obsidian is an igneous rock. Now this fascinates me, grade 4s, because if obsidian is used as a lot of these arrowheads, does that mean, because we know that igneous rocks come from volcanoes, so how do we have igneous rocks here on the prairies? This is a question that I have been asking. I've been asking different Blackfoot elders. I've been asking just trying to get different stories about this. About, did we travel? Did Blackfoot people travel? And yes, they did. This is an answer that I've gotten. Yes, they would travel for things like this. And now think about if you're a young warrior, and you're going to set off, and your task is to go collect some more things, collect things from another place and bring them back so that you can help your tribe. Okay, one of those things is obsidian. They would travel to trade for obsidian. So sometimes you're gone for like a whole year. Sometimes you're gone for a whole year because you're traveling that far away to go and obtain things like obsidian. And there would be other things probably that you would want to come back with. But again, remember, you can't pack too much, but that's how precious this stuff was. If you see that arrowhead there. Okay. Super hard, super sharp. They can make it into a super sharp point so that a good warrior arrowsmith that was really, really good with the arrows could hit a buffalo straight in the heart with something just like that and bring down this big, giant, hulking beast with just one of these. Crazy. Okay.
I noticed Brianna typed a question mark. Brianna, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Well, this is kind of about the skull. What was the crack from?
Ooh, good question. So I've had that asked too, and I'm not too sure where that big crack came from, but it could have something to do with how this buffalo died, I think. But also, this buffalo skull is quite old, so it's gone through a lot of wear and tear. So it might have come after the buffalo died, or it might have had a big reason about how this buffalo died. We're not too sure. But good question. Good thinking about like how does this stuff happen, right? Why are these things there? It's very good to inquire.
Those good I wonder questions, grade 4s. My next question was Caden with a C had a question mark. Do you want to unmute yourself, Caden?
It's not really a question, so yeah, never mind then,
Okay.
I guess.
Sure. Dawson was next. Dawson, you typed a question mark. Do you have a question?
I didn't really understand the warrior part and stuff. It was really weird.
The warrior part?
Yeah.
Oh, when I was talking about like a warrior that is really, really good at shooting arrows.
Yeah.
I was just saying how if you can see how this is an arrowhead.
Well, how do they hit the heart then? It's so hard.
It is so hard, but think about the time that some people put into video games.
Mm-hmm.
You can get really, really good at playing video games, right? Well, some of these people would be spending all of their time, just as much time as some people put into playing video games, and they become expert level. They would become expert level arrowsmiths. So they could hit the teeniest, tiniest little target, even a moving target, with an arrow. And you're right, because the heart is in here. But somehow, when the buffalo are running, they open themselves up just in that one motion, right? Just like if you're deer hunting or if you're elk hunting, you're able to, you might be able to hit the heart. And it's hard, but an expert level warrior would be able to do that. I'll give you the link here. I know his name is Lars Anderson. Lars Anderson is like a modern day guy that shows how those arrowsmiths would have used, and it's all in a motion. There's no pausing. Like I was saying, how in archery we learn how to be in control, be very calm and poised to shoot an arrow. they learned it a little bit differently. Their archery is a little bit different. So it's an interesting way to compare and contrast the different archery forms. And if anybody was interested in that form of archery, I think would be really cool to see. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you 2 more questions.
Yes.
And then we're gonna let you continue. And Harrison, I'm gonna hold yours for a minute, okay? Lavi, you had a question? You can unmute your mic. Dawson, just make sure you mute again, okay, buddy?
Did they sharpen the obsidian, or did they find it like that?
No, they would have to sharpen it. So you eventually, it's a very hard rock, and you have to chip away at it with another rock until you get that point, until you get that shape that you want.
Okay. And then lastly, Dallas asked, is the crack on the skull, is at the front or on the back?
It's just on the front.
Yeah. What?
See, it goes right along this line too. So I don't know too much about skulls, but see how it comes right up along that line?
So amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Harrison, hold on to your question. We're gonna let her continue a little bit more, and then we'll pause her and we'll ask your question. Okay, buddy?
One more thing I want to show you guys, and then we'll ask, I'll answer questions if I can. This is, I wanted you to think about this. Every part of the buffalo, including can you see that? What is that, boys and girls? What do you think that is? Ha, Parker, yep, you're right. That's poop. That is buffalo dung. And so they would even use the buffalo dung. For what? What would you, we consider this to be waste. This is waste. This is like waste from a body, right? Why? What? Yes, Parker. For fuel. So how many of you have been outside on the prairies, the bald prairies, where you're not near a water source, and you just see all of this land? There's tons and tons of rolling hills, but there's not a lot of trees. That's why we're on the prairies. It's called the prairies because we can see forever on these rolling hills, these foothills, and there's not a whole lot of trees. We need the wood for fire, right? So in some times when there was no wood, there was no firewood, because remember, again, these people were moving. They were a nomadic tribe. So moving from place to place, sometimes they might not have wood for fire. They could use the buffalo dung, buffalo chips, and that would burn, and that they would get the heat that they would need for their fires from the buffalo dung. So even that was used. Where is this? Oh, can you see this? That's the buffalo tail. What do you think the buffalo tail was used for? Fly swatter. Even a fly swatter, because there's flies around here, right? You could use that as a fly swatter. You could use it as a whip. You could use it as a form of, let's hurry up here. Good, yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll talk one more thing, because Brianna brought it up about painting, and I mentioned that red paint. So there is a plant, a red ochre plant, that the Blackfoot would use a lot. And if you grind up the plant, you can get a very fine, I'm not sure if you can see it in there, a very fine powder. And that's the red ochre powder. And this would be used, the powder would turn into paint with, all you would need, just a little bit of buffalo fat. a little bit of buffalo fat, and you rub it in your hand and it turns into paint. And this one, so this could be used as paint for horses, paint your face. This is used a lot in ceremony, and even in today it is still used in ceremony. So if you ever see an Indigenous person with red paint on their face, then you can assume that they probably just came from a ceremony. Also, really good for sunscreen. A really good sunscreen too is the paint, the red ochre. So again, using nature as technology, using nature as our teacher. I want you to think about this concept about how the Blackfoot people learned a lot from just observing nature. There's a lot there that we can learn from. Now, I want to, before I start answering questions, I want to tell you one more thing about the buffalo, because I talked a lot about the buffalo parts here, and I wanted you to remember everything was used, right? But there's some very, very important lessons that we learned from the buffalo also alive. One important lesson, boys and girls, this is really, really important, so listen carefully. When a storm is coming, you know, like southern Alberta, storm can come really fast. Summer storm, all of a sudden clouds start rolling in, thunder, lightning, rain, hail. It can come up really, really fast, right? What do cows do? Our domesticated cows. Our cows will usually run away from the storm. They try to get away. And that's a sign for us as humans. We're like, oh, storm's coming. Look at this cow looking all crazy. A buffalo doesn't run away from a storm. The Blackfoot people would observe the buffalo running head on into a storm. And the reason for that is because the buffalo knew that if they ran into a storm, they would come out on the other side sooner. Whereas if a cow runs away from the storm, that storm is chasing the cow, and the cow is going to continue to run away, try to run away. That cow is going to be wet and cold a lot longer than that buffalo. Now, what can we learn from this? Well, we all have struggles, right? Everybody has struggles. Everybody is dealing with their own struggles right now with coronavirus. Are you going to be somebody that runs away from the storm? And this is for your whole life. This isn't just coronavirus. Are you going to be somebody that runs away from the storm and runs away from the problem and just try to avoid it and try to move out of the way? Or are you somebody, is it in your personality? Is it in your characteristic? Is it in your heart to run into the storm? Do you have that courage to run into the storm and face what you're going to face those problems head on, so that you can come out on the other side sooner, you can come out on the other side stronger? That's why the buffalo is so strong. And that's why the buffalo is so, such a symbolic piece for the Blackfoot people. And it could be used for so many people. Anybody can take that lesson and bring it into their lives and to use that to help them, right? So I want you to think about that. If you want to take the lessons from the buffalo, like the lessons that I taught you here, but also the lessons about a buffalo running into a storm, are you going to be that kind of buffalo? Okay, so that's kind of it for my spiel. I want to answer some questions.
What a great analogy, Mrs. Big Bull, bringing it all together to what we're really going through right now. That is, and I actually never knew that. We have cattle. I've lived here my life. We have buffalo. Well, we don't have buffalo. I really didn't know that was the difference between the two of them, and it's amazing. Someone's mic on. Make sure you muted, guys. What we're going to do is, if you have a question in the chat box, I just want you to put the number, what's a good number, Ms. Big Bull, that you want What number do you want?
How
Two?
about, yeah, sure.
2. You have to just put the digit 2, and we will try and ask, we'll ask about 10 questions or so, maybe another 5 minutes, and then we'll start saying goodbye. Okay? So Austin S., you get the first question. You put a number 2. I'm going to mute my mic.
Okay, Austin.
All right. Austin S., you get to ask your question, honey. All right, I'm going to hold off on Austin S. What about Harrison? You had a question before. Why don't you ask your question?
Lavi took mine with the obsidian.
Oh, Lavi.
Must have been a good question then if more than one person wanted to ask it.
Does anyone else have any questions? Thoughts, wonders? Satvik? Go ahead, buddy.
Did they use the buffalo to like for teepees to make it like thicker?
Did they use the buffalo to do what? Sorry, can you repeat that question?
To use it to make their teepees bigger?
Oh, yeah. Good question. So one buffalo hide is really, it's quite big, but it's definitely not going to make a house, right? So they would take several buffalo hides and they would sew them together to make the full covering of the teepee. Now, think about the way that you see a teepee and it's got that white canvas around it. That white canvas is not buffalo hide. It is not a traditional teepee. That's that new improved teepee. Way back then, they would have had to have lots of different buffalo hides sewn together to make one teepee covering. A lot of work for just one home, but it was worth it to them because then they could take it down, wrap it up, put it on a tripod, and then go to the next place that they had to go to. Good question.
All right. Jerome, you're next.
I was just wondering, well, kind of, I can't remember the whole idea, but would they use buffalo hide for the teepees, or would they use a different part of the buffalo?
They would use the buffalo hide, yeah, because that was the biggest piece of covering of leather that they could find, right?
Okay.
Yes, it would be buffalo hide.
And how many would it take to make a teepee?
I've heard before that to do all the pieces, and so not full hides, but about like 200 buffalo, 200 hides to put all of the pieces on there.
Wow.
Yeah.
200.
So then you start realizing how important the buffalo jump was, to have that many buffalo go over, to have them all killed at the same time.
Wow. All right, Dawson, you have a question.
So like, I'm wondering why did they why don't they just live in peace and not harm the buffaloes and just find other food?
Why did the buffalo, sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Why do they only like to kill the buffalo?
Oh, well, they didn't only kill the buffalo. That's a really, really good question. It wasn't only just the buffalo, because there was deer here, there was elk here, there was sometimes a moose here. Yeah.
I've never seen a moose here, ever.
sometimes there would be a moose, or if they would travel a little bit north, they could find a moose. So it wasn't just the buffalo that they would kill. Sometimes they would kill other animals, or there would be smaller game like rabbits that they could kill. But the buffalo, because it was so big, and because it just seemed like there was just this perfect mesh between what the Blackfoot people needed to live life in this environment and what the buffalo provided.
Did some of them die because of the buffalo? Because sometimes buffalo like to charge at people.
You're right. Yeah. Some people would get killed from the buffalo. If you've ever heard the legend of head smashed in buffalo jump, so the reason why it's called head smashed in, it's not called that because the buffalo would get their head smashed in. That is because there is a legend about one Blackfoot boy that wanted to see all of those buffalo going over the cliff. So he hid down there. He didn't tell anybody. He hid down underneath the cliff, but then the buffalo started piling up, and then he got his head smashed into the cliff. So there was definitely a lot of things that could happen.
Did he die because of that?
Pardon?
Did he die because of that?
Yes, he died. Yeah. But that was like hundreds of years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna have 2 questions left. Parker, we're gonna ask your question, and then we're gonna leave it with a really good, thoughtful question from Mrs. Fisher that you guys have read, probably in the chat. If you haven't, I'll have her ask it, and then we're going to wrap up. I know some of you have to go do things or whatever, so you can start leaving. We appreciate you coming, but we're gonna hold off for about maybe 5 more minutes, okay, guys? So Parker, I'm gonna ask you to ask your question, and then we're going to finish Mrs. Fisher's question. Ms. Fisher.
Do the Blackfoot people drink the buffalo's blood?
They would sometimes, but they would usually cook it down. They would usually cook the blood down a little bit, but then they would also use the blood as paint, and then they would use the blood in ceremonies too.
Oh.
Yeah. Good question.
My question, Mrs. Big Bull, it's kind of a 2-part question. So we know from this now how important the buffalo were to the Blackfoot people. And I was wondering, when the buffalo began to disappear, how did that impact your people and how did they adjust to that? And then was it something they tried to stop from happening, or was it kind of just like out of their hands and it was something that they didn't really realize until it was too late?
Yeah, well, so remember when I talked about how the buffalo they looked like there were so many of them. Here's a picture, if you can see it, to try to get an idea of the plains area. Now see how like the numbers in that picture, it's showing huge numbers of buffalo that would have been just roaming around in the hills. And then the Europeans came, and then they started seeing all the really great benefits of the buffalo, and they're like, ooh, hides, yeah, look at all this meat, look at all these things that we could use. And so then they started using it. They started sending back a lot of buffalo hides back to Europe to get turned into coats, and that kind of was starting up the Industrial Revolution. So when Europeans got here, though, they're like, wow, look at all this buffalo. There is no way that we're going to ever, there's no way these buffalo are ever going away. There's so many of them. They started killing them for their food, and then they started killing them for no reason at all. There's really terrible stories about sometimes when they were building the railroad, there would be people on the railroad that would just be hanging on the train as they drove by, and they would be shooting buffalo as they were going for no reason. Nobody's going to eat those buffalo, right? They're going to go to waste. But they thought, oh, look, there's so many of them. There's hundreds of thousands. It's no big deal. And they were killing them for no reason. And so then the numbers started going down. They started going down, until the buffalo were actually getting really, really low, the numbers. And to the point where if the buffalo were gone, remember I said that the Blackfoot people would not survive? As the buffalo started to disappear, the Blackfoot people did start to starve. And a lot of people started to starve. And so they had to figure out a different way of life. And then that's where they started to be, that's where that term colonized comes from, is where Blackfoot people had to start living in homes that stayed in one place, no more teepees. They had to start eating food that wasn't just from the buffalo. They had to start relying on a lot of trading so that they could get the pots and pans that they needed. They could get extra food. They could get flour, something that they had never had before. They never had flour, but now they need flour so that they could eat, because their main source of food was being almost driven to extinction. Now, luckily, that didn't happen. Still have buffalo here, but yeah, a lot of Black people will talk about how the buffalo disappearing had a huge effect on their culture. Did that kind of answer that question? They did. They didn't want it to happen. You know, a lot of people talk about how good it was, even and when it was simpler times. And I think some of us can relate to that a little bit better with the coronavirus, where we're being forced to take life a little bit more, look at it in more simple terms, I think. And it just makes you reevaluate how we live our lives, right? It was kind of the same thing that they did.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Mrs. Big Bull, for joining us. I have been so excited for this to happen. Like, ever since we knew it was going to happen, I've been so excited, and you did not let me down. We learned so much today. There was so much great information. I know that a lot of you probably still have questions. So if you continue to have questions that you think of after this, please go ahead and type them into this team chat. You can go, once this meeting is over, you can continue to add questions to there. And then if you, or you can email it to your teacher, but if you put it in to the chat, Mrs. Big Bull is part of the chat as well, and she can answer them right in there. And then, yeah, I think that's kind of about it, but it's, yeah, again, just thank you so much. It was great, and I learned so much, as always. I've had this presentation before, but there's always something new that comes out of it, and you just do such a great job of presenting it, so thank you.
Thanks so much, Grade Force. I had so much fun. I will definitely, if you have questions that come up, I will try my best to answer them, so go ahead and post them if you have them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you guys want to turn your mics and just say thanks or reply in the chat.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Holy
Guys.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
When did the meeting start? 'Cause
No
9:30.
idea, but we've been here for an hour.
I came in 8 minutes late.
That's all right.
That's okay.
God.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. We've been here for an hour. This is crazy. Bye, Marty. See you at 12:15.
Good night.
Bye. Wash your hands. And bye. Bye.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Miss y'all. See you.
Bye, Ryan.
Bye.
I need to figure out how to stop recording.
Bye, Tara. Go do something nice for your mom. Go tell her something that you learned today, okay? I'm gonna ask her when I see her.
Is Danielle still in here? Does she know how to stop recording? Does anyone know how to stop? In general?
I've never recorded before.
I texted Nicole Garlock. I'm like, how do I stop recording?
Oh.
Is there no stop under the button? No.
Shani just